At her father's 65th birthday, in a room filled with champagne and fake applause, Callie stood up to say something kind, and got laughed at by her own blood. Her father smirked. Maybe spare us the poetry this time, huh? Let's keep it festive. The room chuckled, her cheeks burned, and in that moment something snapped. She didn't fight, she didn't cry. She picked up her clutch and walked out. That night she wasn't leaving in shame. She was walking into the beginning of a life they would never be invited into. It was supposed to be a celebration, my father's 65th birthday, hosted at a lakeside resort in Montana, complete with string lights hanging from pine trees, live jazz, and a catered meal with names I couldn't pronounce. Everyone wore their best, Meredith in her pearl-set dress, Ethan in his tailored blazer, and me. I had sewn my own silk gown, dusky rose with a hand-stitched neckline. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the night they saw me. During dinner, Meredith gave her toast first, eloquent and polished, filled with quotes from leadership books and humble brags about Dad's mentorship. Ethan followed, referencing Hippocrates and making a joke about our dad diagnosing his first broken bone with a flashlight and a popsicle stick. The room laughed, glasses clinked. Then someone, probably Aunt Janice, called out, "Let's hear from Callie!" I hesitated. My fork paused mid-air over roasted duck. I stood slowly, heart thudding behind my ribs. "I didn't prepare a speech," I began, "but I just wanted to say thank you for showing us that love and longevity are possible." That's as far as I got. My father raised his glass and cut me off, laughing. "Maybe spare us the poetry this time, huh? Let's keep it festive." The room chuckled. My cheeks burned. I smiled, tight and practiced, and sat down. No one said anything, not even Mom. Jazz music floated back into the silence. Dessert was served. I didn't taste mine. Under the tablecloth, my hands trembled. I felt 12 again. That night at the school art show when my mural won a ribbon, and Dad said, "It's cute, but don't quit your daydream." I looked around at the table, so perfectly arranged, so full of people who shared my last name but not my language. And I knew. I didn't belong in that room, not because I wasn't good enough, but because they had never been curious enough to see who I really was. So I did something I had never done before. I stood up again. Only this time, I didn't raise a glass. I didn't smile. I picked up my clutch, nodded to no one in particular, and walked out. Past the candles, past the strings of lights, past the vintage rolls they'd rented for the photos. No one followed me. I got into my car, took off my heels, and drove. Windows down, music off, just the sound of the wind and my breath and the unmistakable hush of something ending. Not a tantrum, not a rebellion, a beginning. And for the first time in 3 decades of family dinners, graduations, and holidays, I left without apologizing. I didn't cry. I didn't text a friend to vent. I didn't look back at the glowing estate in the rearview mirror. I just drove, into the dark, into the silence. And somewhere along that winding mountain road, with pine needles flying past the headlights, I realized something. Silence wasn't retreat. It was revolution. In the Monroe household, success came with a blueprint. First, you get into an Ivy, then a white-collar career. Marry well, make 6 figures, have children who wear khaki shorts and say please at the dinner table, and always, always send Christmas cards with professional photography and embossed return addresses. Ethan was the blueprint incarnate. He got into Johns Hopkins, became a trauma surgeon, married a pediatrician, and they now live in a house with 4 bathrooms and a dog named Baxter. Meredith followed with precision. Top of her class at Yale Law, a partnership offer before she turned 32, and a husband who manages portfolios big enough to fund small countries. And then there was me, the creative one. The label started early. I was the kid who painted rainbows on the garage door, arranged her stuffed animals by mood, and turned the attic into an idea lab. My parents smiled politely at the messes, called them phases, and waited for me to grow out of it, but I didn't. In high school, while my siblings joined debate and robotics, I stayed after class to help the art teacher sort watercolor palettes. I won a regional design award once, created a reading nook out of repurposed palettes for a local library. Meredith sent a congratulatory emoji. Ethan asked if I was planning to do this thing full-time. Every family dinner felt like a boardroom, and I was the unpaid intern who didn't get the inside jokes. I brought sourdough I baked from scratch. They brought promotions and tax bracket upgrades. Whenever I shared a new project, like the time I got commissioned to design a healing space for a women's shelter, it was met with tilted heads and a change of subject. Mom would glance at Dad, and he'd say something like, "That's sweet, but maybe look into something with benefits?" I tried. God, I tried. I offered to help redecorate the family cabin, free of charge. I built a flower arch for Meredith's wedding with my bare hands. I hand-painted a mural for Ethan's twins. He replaced it a month later with dinosaur decals. At some point, I stopped offering. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I finally understood. They weren't rejecting what I did. They were rejecting who I was. When you grow up in a family of formulas, being a question mark isn't endearing, it's exhausting. You're the one they joke about at brunch, the one they bring up with a sigh, the footnote at the end of holiday letters, and Callie is still doing her thing. But what they didn't realize is that their blueprint never included joy. Mine did, even if it came with splinters, mess, and a lot of silence in between. The morning after the party, I woke up in my apartment, still wearing half of the silk dress and all of the ache. The silence didn't hurt, not in the way I expected. It felt clean. I made coffee, barefoot, watching the steam rise like breath. No one had texted, no missed calls. I stared at my phone for a long time, then flipped it face down and left it there. That same week, I packed 3 boxes, essentials only. My sketchbooks, a couple of thrifted lamps I'd rewired myself, a vintage stool I sanded down and painted a soft sage. I left everything else, the framed degrees I'd never earned, the dinnerware gifted by people who never asked how I was really doing. I moved to a town I'd only visited once, on a weekend whim. Port Loma, Oregon. Quiet, coastal. Somewhere you could hear the wind before the traffic. I found a studio apartment above a flower shop that always smelled like eucalyptus and dirt. The landlord gave me a discount for fixing up the place. I painted the walls creamy white, hung gauzy curtains, and set up a drafting table next to the window. There was no welcome committee, no fanfare, just air, space, and for the first time in a long time, myself. I took small jobs, a nursery redesign for a single mom who wanted light and calm, a meditation room for a retired teacher. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and every time I saw a client exhale when they stepped into their space, I felt something anchor. One evening, I submitted photos of a sunroom I'd transformed into what I called a light well, wooden beams, paper lanterns, floor pillows sewn from old tapestries. I didn't think much of it, but a week later I got an email from a design blog. They wanted to feature my work. I reread the message twice, then once more, and then I cried, not because I was discovered, but because I was finally seen. I didn't tell my family, I didn't send the link, I didn't post a single thing. I just lit a candle, sat on the floor, and let the soft hum of quiet celebration wrap around me. This goodbye didn't need fireworks. It needed roots, and I had just started planting mine. The house came to me like a whisper, a Sunday morning listing in a paper catalog I almost recycled. 2-story cedar siding, tucked between fog-heavy pines, with wraparound windows and a garden that felt like it had secrets. No chandelier, no fountain, just light. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't a Monroe house, but it was mine. I closed the deal quietly. No champagne, no announcement. Just the sound of keys dropping into my palm and the creak of floorboards that hadn't known footsteps in years. And once I was settled, I planned the gathering. Not a housewarming, not a statement, just a celebration of quiet building, of breath, of arrival. I chose white linen cardstock for the invitations, blind-pressed floral embossing, gold ink calligraphy, no digital RSVP, just an old-school reply card with one line, "Let's celebrate what we build for ourselves." I mailed out 35. Design school friends, clients who had become allies, 2 mentors who saw me before I saw myself. None went to anyone named Monroe. It wasn't spite. It was peace. The house was ready just in time. I sanded the floors by hand, chose pendant lights that cast soft halos, and layered the hallway in woven runners that carried sound like a hush. But the garden, that's where the magic happened. I strung lights between cedar posts, laid rose petals along the stone path, and set one long oak table beneath a linen canopy. Candles of bergamot and amber flickered beside hand-stitched napkins. Wildflower bouquets from the farmer's market leaned gently in ceramic vases. A local acoustic duo played Norah Jones and soft jazz. The chef, a woman I met at the co-op, served roasted root vegetables, herb-crusted lamb, and lavender creme brulee in handmade dishes. People arrived just before sunset, eyes wide, laughter soft. One of them whispered, "This looks like a magazine spread." But no one asked if my dad helped. No one wondered where the rest of the family was. Because these were people who knew the story, not the edited version polished with passive smiles and wine glasses, but the real one. The girl once dismissed as emotional, now standing in a space she designed from silence. Later that night, after the music faded and the espresso martinis were half drunk, My friend Rowan pulled me aside near the garden wall. You realize, he said, this is your homecoming. I looked around. Candles, petals, laughter. No, I whispered. This is the first time I've ever arrived. The morning after the party, I woke to a soft sunbeam crawling across my bedroom wall and the faint scent of jasmine still clinging to my hair. My feet were sore from dancing barefoot, my voice a little hoarse from laughing too loud, too long. But my heart was quiet. Not empty, just still. I padded into the kitchen, made coffee, and scrolled through my phone. And there it was, the photo. Rowan had posted it. Me on the porch, backlit by string lights, barefoot, smiling, no, glowing. The caption read, "She was never lost, just never allowed to lead." It caught fire. Within hours, my DMs filled with messages, former classmates, art professors, even someone from my first design internship. I always knew you were going to do something beautiful. You're living the dream. I cried looking at that picture. But then, mixed in, tucked like thorns among the roses, were names I hadn't seen in a year. Meredith, Ethan, Mom, and finally Dad. Meredith's message came first. You really threw an entire party and didn't think we'd want to be there? Ethan followed with a post of an old family photo. Caption, some people forget their roots. Then Mom, the house looks expensive, why didn't you tell us? And Dad, ever succinct, a screenshot of Rowan's post. Below it, just one sentence. So this is who you are now. No question mark, just quiet accusation. I stared at the messages for a while. Then I put my phone face down again. Not out of anger, out of clarity. They hadn't called in a year. Not once had they asked where I was living, what I was building, or how I was feeling. But now there were candles, applause, witnesses. And suddenly I was theirs again. Their narrative couldn't contain me anymore. The lost one, the still finding herself one, the delicate embarrassment. And when that story cracked, their discomfort spilled out fast. 3 days later, Dad sent an email. Subject, your choices. Message. We saw everything. You embarrassed this family. You acted like we didn't exist. You made people think we don't love you. Maybe next time, think before putting on a show. People are talking. But people were talking. Just not in the way he thought. I'd just been invited to speak at a Women in Design conference in Vancouver. A podcast host reached out, wanting to feature the house, the story behind it, and how to build a life without permission. And for once, I wasn't chasing the spotlight. It had simply followed the light I had created. That night, I sat on the garden steps with a glass of wine, stars scattered above like punctuation marks on a sentence I'd finally written. I opened Instagram, a black background, white text. Silence isn't distance, sometimes it's healing. I posted it to my story. They all watched it. But this time, no one replied. Not right away. The next morning, a single message came in from Meredith. Coffee? Just us, no performance. I stared at it, my thumb hovered, then I typed back. Neutral place, no expectations. It was a Tuesday morning when I met Meredith. We chose a quiet cafe halfway between her office downtown and my coastal town, neutral territory. It was tucked between a used bookstore and a flower shop, like something out of a movie no one watches twice but remembers anyway. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, tapping her spoon against a cappuccino, her shoulders drawn up like armor. She looked nervous. That alone surprised me. Hey, she said as I approached. Hey. I sat. The silence that followed wasn't strained, just full. Like we both knew this conversation mattered more than either of us could say out loud. Meredith stirred her drink for a while. Then she set the spoon down, carefully, as if it might explode. I know we've been awful, she said finally, and I'm not going to defend it. I said nothing, just waited. She exhaled long and low. That party, seeing it online, it felt like a slap. My brow lifted. A slap? Yes, we were excluded. I took a sip of my tea, calm and even. Meredith, I've been excluded my entire life, from conversations, from approval, from mattering. She blinked, looked down, I didn't stop. That night wasn't about revenge, I said. It was the first time I celebrated myself without asking for permission. Silence again, but this time it felt like fertile ground, not a battlefield. Meredith nodded slowly. I get that now, or I'm trying to. I looked at her, really looked. Her face was less polished than usual. No mascara, just her. You always scared us, she said suddenly. You never fit. You didn't follow the blueprint. I smiled faintly. You mean I didn't shrink to fit the box? She gave a small laugh. Something like that. Then her eyes met mine, clearer than I'd ever seen them. What would it take for us to try again? I leaned forward, voice steady. You don't get to rewrite me. You don't get to call it teasing when it hurts. If you want to be in my life, it's as an equal. No hierarchy, no performance, and absolutely no expectation of access. She nodded, not quickly, not defensively, just acceptance. That's fair, she said quietly. She didn't ask to see the house, didn't ask for photos or to meet my friends or to be re-added to anything. She just said, "Can I try to do better?" I looked at her for a long moment, then finally, "You can try." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was real. We sat in that little cafe for a while longer, talking about safe things. Her kids, a book she was reading, a new garden project I was sketching out. It was halting, imperfect, but honest. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to wear armor to be heard. When we left, she didn't reach for a hug, she just smiled, gentle and unsure. And I realized, maybe love doesn't always come back loud. Maybe sometimes it returns quietly, asking if there's still room to begin again. The email came on a Friday. Subject line, "We'd love to feature your work." It was from Hearth and Form, a design publication I'd quietly admired for years, the kind that didn't just showcase beauty but told stories. Stories of women who built things that weren't just impressive but honest. They wanted to profile me, Callie Monroe. I almost said no. Not out of fear, but because I'd spent so long dimming myself for the comfort of others, I forgot what it meant to say yes without hesitation. But I remembered. I said yes. The interview was raw, real. I spoke not in practiced quotes, but in memories. About how I used to measure success by who clapped, and how I stopped waiting for permission to feel proud. About designing spaces for people who'd been told they were too much, or not enough. About building rooms where quiet was allowed to be powerful. I didn't name names, but I said this. Sometimes the places we leave shape us just as much as the ones we build. When the article went live, they used a photo of me in my studio. I was barefoot, standing by the window, light pouring in like it had waited just for me. There were paint smudges on my fingertips, blue chalk on my forearm, and a smile that didn't ask for approval. The caption read, "Callie Monroe, 33, built her space the way she lives, deliberately and without asking for permission." It went quiet viral. Not millions of likes, but enough. Enough for a former professor to write me a letter. Enough for a local gallery to ask about hosting my work. Enough for a woman I'd met once at a networking event to message me, "Your story helped me leave a room where no one ever clapped." And from my family? Silence. But this time it didn't echo. It was just space, room where my life could stretch. That weekend I hosted another dinner. Small, intentional. Mentors, clients turned friends, Rowan and Meredith. She brought wine and a simple bouquet of wildflowers, said little, listened more. We ate under string lights in the garden, laughed, passed dishes, no speeches, just warmth. After we cleared the table, Meredith lingered by the bookshelf, her fingers brushing the spines like she was reading with her hands. "You know," she said quietly, "I think this is the first time I've seen you without armor." I smiled. That's because it's the first time I felt safe without it. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stepped into the studio. No lights, just moon through the skylight. I touched the edge of the drafting table, the grain of the wood familiar under my fingertips. This room had held me through rebuilding, through grieving, through celebration. I lit a candle, sat on the rug. Not to journal, not to plan. Just to be. I looked around at the space I had created, the home I had made, the life I no longer apologized for. And I thought of every table I'd once begged to sit at, every room I tried to belong to. And I whispered, I didn't burn those bridges. I just built a better one. A place where I didn't have to beg for a seat. Because this time, I made the table. Some tables you're never invited to, not because you're not good enough, but because you were never meant to shrink to fit a chair someone else carved. Callie didn't scream, she didn't throw a scene. She just stood up and walked out. And then she built her own table. A table for the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who were always told they were too much or not enough. If this story made you feel seen, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. And don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Revenge Happy Ending, where every story is a reminder that you never need permission to take up space.